In the annals of Israel's history, the reign of King Ahab stands out as a period of profound ignominy and spiritual decline. As we journey back in time, we find ourselves in the 9th century BC. Ahab, the son of Omri, ascends to the throne of Israel, stepping into a lineage marred by disobedience and defiance towards the God of Israel. The seeds of his undoing are sown early with his marriage to Jezebel, a Phoenician princess. This union, more than a mere bond of love, was a political alliance, a move to strengthen Israel's standing among the surrounding nations. However, this alliance came at a great cost. Jezebel was a staunch worshipper of the Phoenician gods Baal and Asherah, and she brought her pagan practices with her into the heart of Israel. It's here we find Ahab's pivotal misstep. Rather than holding firm to the faith of his forefathers, Ahab succumbs to the influence of his foreign queen. He begins to adopt her pagan practices, turning his back on the God of Israel. In the biblical account, 1 Kings 16:31-33, we find a sobering indictment. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. This is no small statement. Israel had seen its share of disobedient kings, yet Ahab's actions were unprecedented. He built an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. He made an Asherah pole, further angering God. Yet it's essential to remember this isn't merely a tale of a king's spiritual decline, it's also a story of a nation led astray. As king, Ahab's choices had far-reaching implications. His adoption of pagan practices wasn't a private affair. It permeated the nation, leading the people of Israel down a path of idolatry. Thus, the stage was set for a reign marked by idolatry and spiritual rebellion against the God of Israel. The dark era of Ahab's reign serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of turning away from God, setting the stage for the tumultuous events that were to follow. King Ahab's devotion to the false gods of his wife's people was a stark departure from the monotheistic faith of his ancestors. This is where our story takes a drastic turn, where the King of Israel, a nation chosen by the one true God, veers off the path of righteousness. It wasn't a subtle shift, it was a blatant, defiant act of rebellion. Ahab, in his desire to please his Phoenician wife Jezebel, erected a temple for her god, Baal, right in the heart of Samaria, Israel's capital. Imagine the message this sent to the people, to see their king bowing before an idol in a temple meant for the worship of a foreign god. But Ahab didn't stop there. He further challenged the sovereignty of God by setting up an Asherah pole, a symbol of the Canaanite fertility goddess. These actions, recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 32 and 33, were in direct violation of God's commandments handed down to Moses on Mount Sinai. This was no small matter. Ahab had effectively turned his back on God, choosing instead to worship created things rather than the Creator. The spiritual and moral implications of this decision were profound. Ahab's actions led Israel down a path of idolatry, causing the people to stray from their covenant with God. But God did not abandon his people. Even as they worshipped false gods, his love for them remained steadfast. He continued to send prophets to warn them, to call them back to the path of righteousness. Yet Ahab and his people chose to ignore these divine messages, further deepening their spiritual decline. In his quest for power and acceptance, Ahab turned his back on the God who had delivered his people from Egypt. He chose earthly alliances over divine favor, material wealth over spiritual riches, and the worship of false gods over the adoration of the one true God. This choice would have far-reaching consequences not only for Ahab, but for the entire nation of Israel, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between God's prophet and the king's false prophets. Despite his rebellion, God in his mercy sent the prophet Elijah to confront Ahab and call him to repentance. In a riveting turn of events, Elijah, a humble messenger of God, came to stand before King Ahab on the heights of Mount Carmel. This wasn't a mere meeting of two individuals, but a divine confrontation, a clash between the power of God and the idols of man. As we delve into the scriptures, we find that Elijah proposed a contest of sorts, a test to reveal the true God. He called for 2 altars to be built, one for Baal and one for the God of Israel, and for 2 bulls to be offered as sacrifices. The true God, Elijah declared, would be the one who could set the sacrifice ablaze without any human intervention. The prophets of Baal went first. They prayed, danced, and even cut themselves, hoping to incite Baal's response. But their efforts were futile. Their God was silent. Their God was absent. Then came Elijah's turn. He prayed to the God of Israel, and fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench around the altar. The people who witnessed this divine display couldn't help but exclaim, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Ahab too was there. He saw the fire fall, heard the people's proclamation, and knew that Baal had been vanquished by the God of Israel. But how did he respond? Did he fall on his knees in repentance? Did he turn from his wicked ways and seek the true God? Sadly, Ahab's heart remained unyielding. Even in the face of undeniable evidence, he chose to cling to his idols, to his false gods. He saw the power of the true God, yet he turned a blind eye. His pride and stubbornness held him captive, blinding him to the truth. Even in the face of undeniable evidence, Ahab remained steadfast in his pursuit of false gods. The path of disobedience and idolatry that Ahab had chosen ultimately led to his downfall. As foretold by the prophet Micaiah, Ahab's end was both tragic and inevitable. The book of 1 Kings, chapter 22, verses 34 to 38, recounts the tale of Ahab's death in battle. An archer shot an arrow at random, yet it struck the king between the sections of his armour. Despite his attempt to stay upright in his chariot until evening, the wound was fatal. The dogs licked his blood from the chariot, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Ahab's passing signalled the end of a reign marked by idolatry and disobedience, but the impact of his choices reverberated long after his death. He had sown the seeds of conflict and turmoil which continued to plague Israel for years to come. His legacy, far from being one of prosperity and peace, was a bitter testament to the destruction that follows when one turns away from God. The years following Ahab's death were fraught with chaos and strife. His son Ahaziah ascended to the throne, but he followed his father's footsteps into idolatry, further entrenching the nation in spiritual and political turmoil. The worship of Baal continued, and the people of Israel were further distanced from their covenant with God. Despite his power and wealth, Ahab's life was marked by dissatisfaction and strife. His pursuit of earthly desires led him further from the path of righteousness, resulting in a legacy of conflict and spiritual decay. His story serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of disobedience and idolatry. Ahab's downfall is a poignant illustration of the biblical principle found in the book of Proverbs, chapter 14, verse 12. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. His life and death serve as a powerful lesson about the importance of obedience to God and the dangers of straying from his path. Ahab's story serves as a stark warning about the consequences of turning away from God. While Ahab's story is a tale of spiritual decline, it also holds valuable lessons for us today. Ahab's reign, marked by rebellion and idolatry, serves as a stark reminder of the importance of faithfulness to God. The king allowed himself to be swayed by his wife Jezebel, leading Israel into the worship of false gods, Baal and Asherah. This deviation from God's commands led to the downfall of his kingdom. The lesson here is clear: faithfulness to God is paramount. Straying from his guidance can lead to disaster. The story of Ahab also illuminates the dangers of compromise. Ahab, in his quest for power and comfort, compromised his faith, his principles, and ultimately his kingdom. He ignored the warnings of the prophets Elijah and Micaiah, choosing instead to follow his own desires. This serves as a potent reminder that compromising on our principles, especially when it comes to our faith, can have dire consequences. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from Ahab's story is the enduring mercy of God. Despite Ahab's persistent rebellion, God remained merciful. When Ahab humbled himself before God after the prophecy of his downfall, God delayed the promised disaster. This shows us that no matter how far we stray, God's mercy remains. His love for us is steadfast, and he is always willing to forgive and welcome us back, as long as we show genuine repentance. So, let Ahab's story inspire us to remain steadfast in our faith. Let it remind us of the importance of adhering to our principles, the dangers of compromise, and the boundless mercy of God. Let us learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them in our present. In the history of King Ahab, we find not only a cautionary tale, but also a call to faithfulness and spiritual vigilance.